Hello, family. Enjoy this relaxing moment with Surly Tales. Remember to hit the like button, subscribe, and share your thoughts in the comments. It means the world to us. Also, share this video with your friends and loved ones, and turn on post notifications so you don't miss future videos from us. Thank you as you do so. Sit back and relax as we dive into the story. The last rays of the golden African sun slipped behind the skyline of Lagos, leaving the bustling city awash in neon lights and the lively glow of roadside fires. Automobile horns blared incessantly as commercial buses, known locally as danfos, wove recklessly through the evening traffic. Hawkers holding trays laden with roasted peanuts, colorful phone accessories, and cold bottled water ran along slow-moving cars, calling out prices to potential buyers. In the midst of this well-orchestrated chaos stood Idowu Babalola, a wealthy entrepreneur whose name had become synonymous with success in Nigeria's booming tech scene. Tall, lean, and meticulously groomed, Idowu presented a figure of calm confidence. Though known by many as a man who had everything, those close to him recognized a certain restlessness in his eyes, an unspoken urge to give back to the streets that had once challenged him. For Idowu had not always been wealthy. He was the son of a struggling petty trader who sold second-hand clothes in the famous Balogun market. Growing up, he'd pushed wheelbarrows under the scorching sun to make a living and help his mother pay the rent. With time, his sharp intelligence found him a scholarship at a technology institute, and from there, luck and perseverance fueled his meteoric rise. Now a celebrated millionaire who owned a software development company, Idowu looked back with empathy on those still left behind. On this particular evening, however, Idowu was not in the comfort of his luxurious office or his high-rise penthouse. Instead, he was in the heart of a less frequented neighborhood, having taken a personal driver to meet with a new foundation board about a philanthropic project. The meeting had concluded earlier than expected, leaving him free to explore. He requested his driver to let him out so he could walk the streets alone, absorbing the energy of the night as he often did to remind himself of his humble beginnings. As he strolled, wearing a crisp designer shirt, well-tailored trousers, and polished shoes that reflected the colored lights of passing cars, he noticed a figure huddled in a corner, beside a crumbling wall. It was a young woman, possibly in her early 20s, curled up with a threadbare blanket wrapped around her. The face that peeked out from behind the cloth was gaunt, dirt smudged on her cheeks. Her large eyes sparkled with tears that had dried into a thin film. Something about her drew his attention. Perhaps it was her fragile posture or the quiet dignity in how she carried herself, even in homelessness. People passed by, sometimes shooting her disapproving glances, other times ignoring her altogether. A sense of empathy washed over Idowu, and he felt the old knot of guilt in his chest tighten. He, too, knew what it was like to feel invisible. He paused, approached gently, and knelt beside her. "Hello," he began softly. "Are you all right?" His voice made her stir, and for a moment she looked startled. Then fear transformed into wariness, as though she was ready to run if he tried anything strange. She mumbled something, her voice shaky and almost inaudible. Idowu strained to listen. "Please. I'm hungry," she said in broken English, which hinted at limited formal education. The sincerity in her plea reminded Idowu of the nights he'd gone to bed hungry in childhood. He didn't hesitate to dip a hand into his trouser pocket and retrieve some bills. Extending the money toward her, he noticed her trembling hand reach out, but she paused, perhaps unsure if this was a trick. When she finally accepted the cash, tears welled in her eyes, and she cast them downward with obvious shame. "What is your name?" he asked gently. "Ebony," she whispered. Idowu nodded with an encouraging smile. "That's a beautiful name. Let me help you. It's late, and the city at night can be dangerous. I can take you somewhere safe for the evening." Her eyes darted around as if measuring the sincerity of his offer. The walls of distrust that her life on the streets had built seemed thick. But something about this tall stranger, his well-spoken manner, the kind expression in his eyes, felt different. In an environment where trust was often a luxury, she sensed an unusual warmth in him, and so she found herself nodding. Together, they walked back toward Idowu's waiting car, a sleek black Mercedes S-Class that garnered stares from every angle of the street. As Idowu opened the door for Adamma, he felt her hesitation intensify. She seemed to shrink back, possibly worried about stepping into such a luxurious machine with a man she'd just met. But a mix of desperation and cautious hope compelled her forward, and eventually she slid inside, shoulders stiff with anxiety. During the ride, Idowu's attempts at conversation were slow but patient. He asked about her life, how she had ended up on the streets, and whether she had any family. Adamma's answers were curt, guarded. She revealed little except that she had left home due to problems she didn't care to disclose, and that she'd been living on the roadside for the past few months. Her stomach had churned with hunger and fear each night, with no clue whether or not she'd see another sunrise. At length, she said she'd had a few near escapes from men who tried to exploit her vulnerability, and that in a city as unforgiving as Lagos, trust was scarce. Idowu, reminded of his philanthropic drive, felt an upsurge of compassion. It occurred to him that providing a roof for one night was the least he could do. He promised her a hot meal, a bath, and a bed in one of the guest rooms at his penthouse. Just for tonight, he clarified, lest she feel any pressure. Tomorrow, we'll see what can be done to help you find your feet. Traffic lessened as they approached Victoria Island, one of Lagos' most upscale districts, dotted with glistening skyscrapers and well-lit streets. Adamma stared out the window in awe, her eyes wide at the sudden shift from her nightly vantage point of decrepit corners to these polished environments. She seemed overwhelmed but tried to contain her surprise. As the car pulled up to a tall glass building, Idowu's residence, he felt a twinge of worry that perhaps she would feel intimidated. But to his relief, she followed quietly, though the tension in her shoulders remained. The doorman greeted Idowu respectfully, raising eyebrows at the unexpected companion by his side. Without comment, Idowu led Adamma into the private elevator that whisked them upward to his penthouse on the top floor. When the elevator doors opened, Adamma stepped out hesitantly. Before her stretched a lavish, open-floor apartment with a panoramic view of the city's night lights. Modern African art adorned the walls, blending traditional Yoruba motifs with contemporary flair. Plush sofas, polished marble floors, and floor-to-ceiling windows gave the space an air of minimalistic luxury. Idowu gently guided her through the living area. Make yourself comfortable. The guest room is down the hall. There's a bathroom inside. Feel free to use whatever you need. He paused. I'll arrange dinner for you. Adamma nodded silently, her face betraying a wave of conflicting emotions, gratitude, suspicion, disbelief. She walked toward the room, her bare feet padding softly on the cool marble, the door shutting behind her with a soft click. Idowu then drew a deep breath. Something about her vulnerability tugged at him. Though he had encountered countless pleas for help, something about Adamma's silent resilience felt genuine. He planned to call a few contacts in the morning to see if there was a safe shelter or a job lead for her. For now, he pushed away the nagging doubts. After all, he reasoned, a small gesture of kindness could go a long way in changing a person's life. Little did he know how drastically his own life was about to be altered, and that within 24 hours, all his generosity would come into question in a way he could never have imagined. The air conditioning in Idowu's penthouse softly hummed through the night, providing a stark contrast to the humidity and clamor of the Lagos streets below. After escorting Adamma to the guest room, Idowu busied himself in the open-plan kitchen, heating up jollof rice and stew left by his housekeeper. It was a simple but hearty meal, a staple that most Nigerians treasured. Adding a bottle of purified water and some fresh fruits to the tray, he laid everything out neatly, then knocked on the guest room door. A hesitant voice responded from within. When Adamma opened the door, Idowu noticed she had already taken a shower. Her damp hair framed a face scrubbed clean of dirt, revealing a sharp but delicate set of features. She wore a simple oversized t-shirt from the closet, the only thing she could find that wasn't obviously designer and intimidating. Her eyes flitted between the tray and Idowu's kind expression, uncertain but hopeful. "Thank you," she managed, her voice still trembling with fatigue and hunger. "You're welcome," Idowu said, placing the tray on a bedside table. "I hope you like jollof rice. My housekeeper prepared it earlier. I can get you something else if you prefer." Ebony quickly shook her head. No, this is perfect. Her eyes lingered on the steaming plate for only a second before she took the spoon and began to eat with quiet fervor. It was the first warm meal she'd had in days, and her exhaustion melted away with each bite. Idwu lingered at the doorway, making sure she was comfortable, but also giving her space. After a moment, he bid her good night and gently shut the door. Back in his own room, he felt a flurry of conflicting emotions. Relief that he could offer help to someone so clearly in need, but also a niggling sense of unease, perhaps a leftover from stories he had heard of robberies or scams that targeted wealthy philanthropists. He told himself to remain cautious, but not to let cynicism overshadow his willingness to lend a hand. Sliding into his luxurious bed, with soft cotton sheets, he resolved to take the next steps carefully. He'd help her find a job or a stable situation. Surely, with his connections, that would be straightforward. The city lights twinkled below his window, a sea of possibilities. The morning dawned bright and hot, as was typical in Lagos. Idwu woke early, intending to finalize a few business deals before meeting with Ebony. He brewed some fresh coffee, inhaling the dark, nutty aroma as he stepped onto the balcony to greet the rising sun. In the distance, the lagoon shimmered, and the silhouette of ships heading to Apapa port dotted the water. The moment felt serene, a calm before another day of corporate hustle and personal responsibilities. As the day advanced, Idwu dressed for work in a crisp white shirt and navy-tailored trousers, the outfit exuding professional confidence. His driver was due to pick him up in an hour. He decided to check on Ebony, see how she'd slept, and perhaps figure out her next steps. Approaching the guest room, he raised his hand to knock, but the door was slightly ajar. "Ebony?" he called gently, pushing the door open. The sight that greeted him was surprising. The bed was neatly made, a rare courtesy that indicated gratitude, but the room was empty. Curtains drawn, no trace of clothes or personal items. A flash of disappointment and concern coursed through Idwu. Had she left already? Perhaps she was too shy or proud to face him. Maybe she decided it was best to leave before he could question her further about her past. He pivoted around, scanning the penthouse, only to find the living room deserted and the kitchen undisturbed, save for a single empty glass by the sink. Standing amid the silence, he told himself not to worry. Maybe she just stepped out or was exploring the building. But the sense of disquiet grew. He checked the small laundry room, the pantry, even the balcony, no sign of her. Venturing outside his front door, he asked the security man in the hallway if he'd seen Ebony leave. The man shook his head, perplexed. No one had passed through the corridor except for a cleaner, who had come much earlier. Confusion mounting, Idwu returned to the penthouse. That was when he realized something else. The clothes he had carefully laid out for himself, the polished shoes, the crisp shirt and the trousers, were not where he'd left them on the chair near his dressing room. In their place was a different set of clothes, an old, threadbare shirt and well-worn jeans, too big for Ebony but certainly not belonging to him. Instantly, Idwu's heart pounded. This wasn't simply about a vanishing houseguest. Something bizarre was happening. Striding quickly to his dressing room, he rummaged through the closet. Some of his custom-made suits were missing. His eyes flickered to the nightstand. The watch he typically wore, a limited edition timepiece worth thousands of dollars, was gone. A wave of anger and disbelief washed over him. He quickly checked his electronic safe. Thank goodness it remained locked. He had only placed a small amount of emergency cash inside, and it appeared untouched. Questions raced through his mind. How had she vanished? Why had she switched his clothes and taken off with a few items, but not everything of value? The entire scenario felt off. The next call he made was to his building's security manager. He explained the situation in quick, clipped sentences. The manager promised to review the CCTV footage from the elevator lobby and corridors. In the meantime, Idwu stood in the living room, trying to rein in his frustration. A pang of betrayal hit him like a punch to the gut. He had offered Ebony shelter, food, and kindness. And she had apparently taken advantage of his good nature. He tried to steady his thoughts. Maybe there was a logical explanation. Could she have borrowed an outfit for some reason, leaving behind the old clothes she arrived in? But why take his watch? And where had she gone so early in the morning? Minutes later, he received a call back from the security manager. A grim tone laced the man's words. "Sir," he said, "I've reviewed the footage. We see a young woman stepping into the service elevator at about 5 a.m. She was wearing a baseball cap and carrying a large plastic bag. She avoided the main lobby cameras by taking the basement exit. She left the building on foot. That confirmed it. Ebony had slipped out undetected in the pre-dawn hours. The image of her carrying a large plastic bag, likely stuffed with his clothes, filled Idowu with exasperated bewilderment. How meticulously she must have planned this. The fact that she knew exactly how to evade the main security cameras suggested either sheer luck or cunning. Idowu hung up the phone, his mind in turmoil. He paced the living room, recalling every detail of their interactions. Her timid demeanor, her fearful eyes, her genuine appreciation of the food. Had it all been an act? It was as though he had let a stranger into his sanctuary and ended up paying a price for his naive generosity. Despite the sense of betrayal, he also felt a pang of remorse. The memory of her tearful eyes haunted him. Could desperation have driven her to commit theft? With a sigh, he glanced at the time. He still had important meetings that day. He would not let this unfortunate event derail his obligations. While he resolved to report the incident, part of him hesitated. He knew the system often treated the homeless harshly, especially a young, penniless woman who had few means of defense. Could he bear the responsibility of having her locked away in a cell for petty theft? In his predicament, he realized the line between philanthropic compassion and personal safety was more blurred than he'd ever imagined. He tried to console himself with the thought that, aside from the watch and some clothes, nothing major was lost, yet the sting remained. He felt fooled, uncertain how he could have misjudged her so badly. Still, Idowu had no idea that this was only the beginning. There was far more to Ebony than he had gleaned in their brief time together. His morning's rude awakening was but the first step in a series of revelations that would challenge his assumptions, his moral compass, and even the safety he believed his wealth afforded him. Idowu's day at the office was a battle between corporate demands and a mind tangled in the morning's events. His company, Babalola Tech Solutions, occupied the top floors of a modern high-rise in Victoria Island. Glass walls, state-of-the-art computers, and a workforce of brilliant software developers underscored the fortune he'd built. Normally, he thrived on the fast pace of business proposals, innovation sessions, and investor meetings. But this time, a sour note clung to his thoughts, casting a shadow over his usual enthusiasm. During a midday break, his secretary, Ada, noticed his preoccupation. Ada was a sharp woman in her early 30s, with braided hair that fell neatly to her shoulders and a no-nonsense demeanor. She had been with him since the early days, and he trusted her counsel. "You seem troubled, sir," she remarked, lightly tapping on the door to his office. "Is everything all right?" Idowu forced a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Just dealing with a personal matter," he admitted. He considered telling her about Ebony but hesitated, fearing he might appear foolish. Yet, Ada's concern was genuine, and he valued her discretion. So, with a sigh, he recounted the entire story in brief. Ada's eyebrows furrowed. "That's unfortunate, sir. But your heart was in the right place. You tried to help someone in need." Idowu leaned forward, elbows on his polished mahogany desk. "I can't help feeling naive, Ida. She stole from me. But I also can't shake off the possibility that she was desperate. Did I push her into a corner by offering too much at once?" Ada considered the question before responding. "You did nothing wrong in showing kindness. People make their own choices. Still, maybe we can figure out who she is. We have resources. Should we contact the police or private investigators?" He mulled it over. Part of him wanted to let the incident go, chalk it up to experience. Yet, something beyond mere theft nagged at him. "All right," he finally said. "Reach out to one of the security consultants on our list. Have them run a check. I'm curious about her background." Ada nodded, stepping out to make calls. Left alone, Idowu stared out the floor-to-ceiling windows. The city below bustled with movement, a tapestry of high-rises, slums, and markets all coexisting. He had escaped poverty, but that didn't mean the memory of it had left him. In a way, he empathized with Ebony's probable desperation. That empathy, however, was now tinged with caution. By evening, Ada returned with an update. The private investigator says it might take a few days to get any lead. Right now, they have little more than your description and the CCTV footage from your building. Alright, keep me updated, Idowu replied, feeling an odd mixture of relief and uncertainty. As he headed home after a grueling day, the traffic on 3rd Mainland Bridge crawling along, he found his mind wandering again to Ebony. Who was she really? Why had she left behind her old clothes in exchange for his garments? Was it purely theft, or a sign of something more cunning? When he finally stepped into his penthouse, the emptiness enveloped him in an unsettling hush. The guest room, once briefly occupied by a stranger, now felt ghostly. He scanned the shelves in the living room, noticing ironically that Ebony had not touched anything else of value, no expensive gadgets or art pieces. She had only taken clothes, his watch, and left. It struck him as a strangely selective theft. The next day brought more routine: investor calls, team meetings, software development updates. Idowu tried to bury himself in work to shake off the lingering unease, but it refused to leave him. Somewhere in the city, Ebony roamed free with his possessions and the memory of his kindness. For reasons he couldn't fully articulate, he wanted answers more than revenge. Late in the afternoon, as he prepared to head to a launch event for a new mobile application, Idowu's phone buzzed. It was the private investigator, Mr. Hrevenge. Idowu's pulse quickened. He excused himself from a conversation with a colleague and took the call. "Sir, we've got something," Hrevenge said in a low, clipped tone. "One of my men recognized the face you sent from the CCTV footage. She may have been spotted earlier today in Oshodi Market, trying to sell a watch that matches your description." Idowu's jaw tightened. Oshodi was a chaotic hub, teeming with second-hand goods and petty traders. If she was trying to fence his watch there, it wouldn't be easy to trace. "So, do you know her identity?" he asked. "Not yet, but the watch didn't sell. The buyer found it suspicious and walked away. My contact said the lady seemed agitated. We're trying to track her movements, but the market is huge and it's easy to disappear. If we find anything else, I'll let you know." Ending the call, Idowu felt a surge of conflict. A part of him was glad the watch remained unsold. He was oddly protective of that sentimental piece. Another part of him pitied her desperation. Yet, none of this explained why she had stolen from him in the first place. The frustration gnawed at his gut. That evening, the launch event was a blur. Even as he shook hands and made small talk with fellow entrepreneurs and government officials, his thoughts darted to the bustling corners of Oshodi. He could picture Ebony, weaving through the throngs of people, stalling at makeshift stalls, trying to hawk the watch. Her once starving eyes now alive with determination or perhaps fear. When the event ended, he checked his phone obsessively, but no new calls or messages came. Returning home felt like returning to a puzzle, each piece out of place. A pang of guilt surfaced as well. He realized he might be placing undue focus on a single incident, but something about the entire scenario told him there was more beneath the surface. A puzzle he couldn't ignore. Days passed with no new leads. Idowu's life continued in its typical rhythm, albeit overshadowed by a sense of incompletion. He poured extra attention into his philanthropic ventures, possibly in reaction to the betrayal. He visited a few shelters, donated large sums to orphanages, and even made time to speak with street children about the possibilities of education and technology. Each time, he wondered if Ebony had ever passed through any of these institutions. Her face stayed with him, a face scrubbed clean of dust, with eyes that held secrets. It was during one such charitable visit, this time to a youth development center in Surulere, that he overheard a conversation that made his heart pound. Two staff members were discussing a homeless girl who had shown up at the center's gates, asking about a place to sleep for the night. She'd left abruptly, though, as soon as they'd mentioned taking down her details. Idowu's pulse raced when one of them described the girl, said her name was Ebony, or something like that. She seemed scared. Didn't trust us enough to stay. He stepped in, politely but urgently. "Excuse me," he asked, "when was this, exactly?" They told him it had been just the previous night. She had come around 11 p.m. but fled. Iduu's mind spun. So she was still in Lagos, likely floating between one makeshift shelter and another. He asked if the center had security cameras. They nodded. However, by the time the staff had tried to record her presence, she had bolted. A quick replay of the footage showed her face turned away from the camera. Only a sliver of her profile was visible, enough for Iduu to confirm it was indeed her, based on the unique shape of her jawline and hair. She wore a hoodie that concealed much of her features. Something about the footage unsettled him. There was a wary alertness to her posture, as if she was accustomed to being hunted or worried about being recognized. Why that kind of paranoia unless she had a bigger secret? The question loomed, tying knots in Iduu's stomach. On his ride home that evening, the Lagos traffic was its usual snarl. Bright headlights reflected off the wet asphalt from a brief rain shower, intensifying the claustrophobic atmosphere of cars jammed in lines. Iduu found himself staring out the window, hardly noticing the horns and street vendors. He was lost in thought, re-evaluating every assumption. He had started with the notion that Ebony was just another homeless person in need, then believed she was a petty thief. But now he wasn't so sure. It felt more layered. Perhaps she had a reason to run, or maybe she was involved with something more dangerous. The puzzle teased him with half-answers and growing questions. He wanted to find her, if only to resolve his conflicted emotions and, at this point, possibly help her if she was in deeper trouble than he initially suspected. Little did he know, the truth he sought was closer than he imagined. A chain of events was about to unfold, leading him down a path he never anticipated. It was midweek, just after the sun had dipped below the haze of the Lagos horizon, when Iduu's phone rang unexpectedly. He glanced at the caller ID, unknown number. His heart thumped, a bizarre hope that it might be Ebony herself. Answering swiftly, he was met with a crackling silence for a couple of seconds before a voice spoke. "Is this Mr. Babalola?" a woman asked in a breathless whisper. "Yes, who is this?" he replied, tensing at the urgency in her tone. There was a pause, as if the caller struggled with fear or indecision. Then she continued, "My name is Yawanda. I'm calling because I have information about Ebony." Iduu's heart rate surged. "Please go on." I don't want to speak on the phone," she said, voice trembling. "She's in danger. I think you might be the only one who can help her." A swirl of confusion and adrenaline coursed through Iduu. In danger? The same person who stole from me? Still, he felt compelled to help. "But where can we meet?" They arranged to meet that evening at a discreet outdoor cafe near Teslim Balogun Stadium in Surulere. Iduu ended the call, a million questions swirling in his mind. An unknown woman calling out of the blue, claiming to have urgent news about Ebony. It could be a trap, or it could be the breakthrough he needed. He decided to proceed cautiously. He asked his security consultant to follow discreetly and keep an eye on the meeting from a distance. That night, the cafe bustled with patrons grabbing suya or soft drinks after the day's hustle. Tables lined the sidewalk, lit dimly by flickering bulbs and the neon signs of adjacent shops. Iduu arrived in a simple black polo shirt and jeans, eschewing his usual formal wear. He wanted to blend in, unrecognizable as a millionaire. Taking a seat at a corner table, he scanned the faces of passing women, trying to spot someone who looked as though she might be searching for him. A few minutes later, a slender woman with braided hair approached. She wore a yellow blouse and a long skirt, her eyes darting nervously around. "Mr. Babalola?" she asked, voice low. He nodded. She sank into the plastic chair opposite him, glancing over her shoulder as if expecting to be followed. Iduu gestured for a server, and they ordered bottles of malt drinks. "Thank you for meeting me," Yawanda began, picking at the label on her malt bottle. "I heard from someone at the youth center that you were looking for Ebony." "She's my cousin." Iduu leaned forward, interest piqued. "Cousin?" She never mentioned family. "How did you find my number?" Yawanda sighed. "I found your business card among some of her things. She must have taken it from your penthouse or something." Her eyes clouded. "I'm worried about her." "So am I," Iduu admitted. "But she stole from me. She vanished, and now you're telling me she's in danger?" Yawanda fidgeted with her fingers. It's complicated. Abeni ran away from home years ago. Her father he was deeply involved in some criminal activities. She got caught up in it as a teenager. They used her to lure unsuspecting people into scams. It was terrible. She eventually escaped, but her father's associates kept looking for her, especially because she witnessed something. Something they're afraid she'll reveal. Idowu felt a chill crawl up his spine. This was more than a simple story of homelessness. What did she witness? Yewande lowered her voice further. A murder. She saw one of the ringleaders kill someone, and she has evidence. Pictures, I think. Ever since then, they've been chasing her, making sure she can't settle anywhere. She's terrified of being found. The puzzle pieces started forming a coherent shape in Idowu's mind. Her paranoia, her fear at the youth center, the cunning ability to slip away unnoticed. It also explained why she might have stolen from him, perhaps to change her appearance or pay someone off. But it still didn't account for everything. Why call me? Idowu asked. If she doesn't trust the authorities, there are NGOs. She's convinced the police are compromised, Yewande interjected. In some parts of Lagos, corruption runs deep. As for NGOs, she's tried. They can't protect her from these people. They have connections everywhere. But she said you were kind. And you have influence. She believes if you knew her full story, maybe you could help her vanish or testify against them. Idowu's head spun. He'd never intended to step into a criminal conspiracy. Yet here he was in a roadside cafe hearing about murders and hidden evidence. Where is she now? Yewande's shoulders slumped. I don't know exactly. But I've heard she's been sleeping in abandoned buildings in the Mushin area. She's afraid. She knows they're closing in. And I also know she regrets stealing from you. She was just desperate for a quick disguise. She used your clothes to avoid being recognized. The watch was a last-minute idea to get cash. A swirl of conflicting emotions, anger, pity, determination, flooded Idowu. If this was true, Abeni was more victim than villain. What do you want from me? He asked gently. Her eyes pleaded. Help her. She's not just a thief, she's a frightened girl running for her life. If we can keep her safe long enough, maybe she can hand over the evidence to honest authorities or the press. Idowu leaned back, mind racing. Protecting Abeni meant taking on a dangerous group. Could he do that? Yes, he had resources, money, connections. But was he willing to risk his own safety? Before he could answer, Yewande's eyes snapped to a figure across the street. Her face went pale. I have to go, she whispered, standing so abruptly that her chair nearly toppled. Someone's watching me. I'll contact you again. Wait, Idowu tried to stop her, but she was gone, disappearing into the crowd as quickly as she'd appeared. He scanned the street but didn't see anything obviously suspicious, though in Lagos, a single face lost in the throng was easy to miss. With a sigh, he paid for the drinks and departed, aware that his security consultant might be tailing Yewande at a safe distance. He felt like a reluctant player dragged into a grand, perilous game. A wave of sympathy for Abeni washed over him, overshadowing his sense of betrayal. If she was telling the truth, then the theft paled in comparison to the danger she faced. At home, he mulled over the new information. Could he orchestrate a safe route for Abeni to either leave the city or hand over her evidence? He remembered some of his friends in the legal sector, people who fought corruption cases. Perhaps they could guide him. But first, he needed to confirm Abeni's story. Without proof, he risked becoming a pawn in a con. The next morning, Idowu visited a trusted contact, a retired commissioner of police named Uche Enuma. They met in a discreet office, away from prying eyes. Uche was a stout man in his late 50s, known for his integrity and for resisting bribery during his service years. Idowu recounted the story, carefully omitting certain details to protect Abeni's identity. Uche listened intently, then stroked his salt and pepper beard. The underworld in Lagos is complex, he said. Criminal rings often have members in the police force. If this girl's father is indeed part of a major syndicate, she's right to be cautious. If she truly has incriminating evidence, those men will stop at nothing to silence her. So what's my next move? Idowu asked, feeling uneasy at the gravity of the situation. Find her, Confirm the story. If the evidence is real, we involve the right channels. I still have a few trustworthy connections. But you need to exercise caution. These people don't respect wealth or reputations. They eliminate threats. Idu nodded, a knot forming in his stomach. His desire to help had suddenly turned into a dangerous venture. Yet, the memory of Abeni's vulnerable eyes refused to let him walk away. He had to see this through, if only to ensure she got a fair chance at survival. As he left Uche's office, he felt the city's heat pressing down on him like a physical weight. The sun glared off the windshields of speeding cars, and hustlers on the sidewalks shouted for attention. Everything seemed too normal for a place that harbored so much hidden danger. Idu climbed into his car, the driver pulling into the chaotic midday traffic, and let out a slow exhale. He was venturing into uncharted territory, one that involved criminals, hidden evidence, and a young woman on the run. And in his penthouse, only days ago, he had merely wanted to offer a meal and a place to sleep. Life's turns could be dizzyingly abrupt. Yet, something in him had already decided he would not abandon Abeni, even if the path ahead was fraught with risk. 3 tense days followed. Idu found himself scanning news reports, feeling a spike of anxiety whenever he read about a body discovered or a violent clash in any Lagos neighborhood. He feared the worst, that Abeni might have been caught. But no calls came from Yawanda, and his private investigator turned up no new sightings. In the meantime, Idu discreetly mobilized some resources. Through an old friend who ran a security firm, he arranged for a safe house, a modest apartment in a quiet part of Ikeja, where Abeni could potentially hide if he found her. He also contacted a journalist he trusted, a woman named Inako, who had gained recognition for exposing corruption in the police force. While Idu was hesitant to involve the media prematurely, he knew an investigative journalist might serve as a buffer, ensuring Abeni's story reached the right ears if the official channels were compromised. Amid these preparations, he was scheduled to attend a high-profile charity gala at Eco Hotels and Suites. It was a black-tie event sponsored by prominent Lagos elite to raise funds for educational programs across Nigeria. In the past, Idu would have looked forward to the gathering as a chance to network and champion philanthropic causes. This time, however, he felt a trace of distraction, his mind half consumed with thoughts of Abeni's predicament. He arrived at the gala wearing a tailored navy tuxedo, stepping onto the red carpet under the flashing cameras of society photographers. Once inside, the vast ballroom dazzled with crystal chandeliers, tasteful African decor, and the murmur of polite conversation. Guests floated about in gowns and suits, discussing business ventures and philanthropic aspirations. If not for the seriousness of his predicament, Idu might have found it enchanting. Even as he shook hands and posed for photos, a sense of unease simmered within him. He couldn't help but wonder if the criminals chasing Abeni might infiltrate an event like this to track him down. His eyes scanned the crowd for anything suspicious, though he reasoned it was unlikely they'd make a scene in such a public, high-security venue. About halfway through the evening, as he stepped off stage after giving a brief speech, his phone vibrated in his pocket. He glanced at the screen, unknown number again. Slipping into a quiet corridor near the restrooms, he answered. "Abeni?" he said in a low voice, hoping. "It's Yawanda," came the whispered reply. "She's with me. She wants to talk to you." A shiver of relief passed through him. "Is she safe?" "For now. She's terrified. She wants to meet. But it has to be somewhere discreet." Idu hurriedly recalled the safe house arrangement in Ikeja. "Tell her to come to 14B Alyamide Street in Ikeja, tomorrow at noon. I'll be waiting. She can trust me." A brief pause. Then Yawanda's voice returned, "We'll be there." The line went dead. Idu slid his phone back into his pocket, exhaling a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. Tomorrow he would finally get answers. But with that sense of resolution came a new wave of worry. If Abeni was being hunted by dangerous men, how could he ensure her safety, even at a safe house? He stepped back into the ballroom, a swirl of elegantly dressed guests and shimmering lights. Colleagues and acquaintances congratulated him on his speech, but their words barely registered. Idu had no appetite for the sumptuous buffet or the small talk. After making polite excuses, He left the gala early, ignoring the questioning looks from event organizers. That night, sleep eluded him. He paced his penthouse, reviewing the plan. He had asked 2 discreet security professionals, men he trusted implicitly, to guard the safe house from a distance. He also had Iniko, the journalist, on standby. If Abeni's story held the kind of explosive truth he suspected, it was time to bring it into the light. Morning arrived, bright and blisteringly hot. By 11 a.m., Idowu was already at the safe house. Despite its modest appearance, a narrow 2-bedroom apartment in an older building, the interior was clean and comfortable. The windows were fitted with curtains that could shield anyone from prying eyes. The building itself was in a quiet residential area, far from main roads, which minimized the chance of random passers-by. Outside, a battered Toyota Corolla idled, containing one of Idowu's security men, ready to respond if trouble arose. Another operative was stationed discreetly down the street. Idowu checked his watch repeatedly, nerves stretching taut with each tick. Finally, at 12:30, the distant hum of a motorbike announced arrivals. From the window, Idowu glimpsed Yewande and Abeni dismounting. They paid the bike rider and hurried toward the building, scanning the vicinity with jittery alertness. Moments later, the door opened. Yewande stepped in first, followed by Abeni. Idowu's breath caught. In daylight, her features were even more pronounced, wide, searching eyes set in a face that looked as if it hadn't rested in weeks. She clutched a small backpack to her chest. Gone were the oversized t-shirt and jeans from his penthouse. She now wore a faded African print skirt and a loose blouse. Both women looked exhausted and wary, as if expecting an ambush at any moment. Idowu raised his hands gently, showing he meant no harm. "I'm glad you're safe," he said softly. Abeni's eyes welled with tears. She took a step forward, then retreated as though unsure. "I'm sorry," she murmured, voice trembling. "I never meant to steal from you, but—" Idowu held up a hand to stop her. "We'll talk about that later. Right now, let's just get you settled. There's food and water in the kitchen. You can rest here safely." She nodded, and Yewande guided her into the living area. They both sank onto a worn couch, relief palpable in their posture. After a moment, Idowu sat across from them, carefully choosing his words. "Yewande told me some of your story, about your father and the danger you're in. I want to help. But I need to understand everything." Abeni inhaled shakily. She placed the backpack on her lap, hugging it as if it were a lifeline. "My father. He was a respected businessman on the surface, but he also operated a criminal network. Fraud, smuggling, sometimes worse. As I got older, they forced me into roles, pretending to be someone's girlfriend, distracting men, luring them. I hated it, but I had no choice." Her voice faltered, eyes filling with tears. Idowu's gut twisted. He urged her softly, "What changed?" Abeni swallowed hard. "I saw something I shouldn't have. One of his associates, a high-ranking member, shot a man who threatened to expose them. I got pictures on my phone, accidentally, while trying to capture a video of them. Ever since, they've been after me. They found out I had proof. I ran away, left everything including my phone. But I managed to keep the memory card. It's hidden in a safe place." She paused, taking a shaky breath. "I never planned on stealing from you," she repeated, voice ragged with remorse. "But that night I saw them outside your building. They must have tracked me. I was afraid they'd find me if I wore the same clothes. So I panicked, took yours and ran." Idowu felt a pang of sympathy as well as regret for how harshly he had judged her. "Why not just tell me?" he asked gently. She laughed hollowly. "Who would believe a thief on the run? I've tried telling others before, and they just dismissed me. Or turned me in for a reward." A tense silence settled over the apartment. Idowu exchanged a glance with Yewande, who nodded in affirmation. Everything Abeni said matched the story Yewande had shared. "All right," Idowu said quietly. "Do you still have that memory card?" Abeni nodded, placing a trembling hand on the backpack. "It's not here, but I know where it is. It's in a safe deposit box, under a different name. I only have the key." She patted the bag. "If we get it, you'll see I'm telling the truth." Idowu exhaled, running a hand over his face. He'd stepped into a labyrinth of danger and deceit. Yet, something about Ebony's desperate honesty resonated deeply. He made a decision. We'll get the card and we'll show it to someone we can trust. I know a journalist, someone who exposed a major scandal last year. If we get her on our side, she can help blow this open. Your father's men will have no choice but to scatter if the evidence becomes public. Ebony's eyes flickered with a hint of hope, but also terror. They won't stop easily. They'll kill me before letting that evidence out. Idowu leaned forward, voice firm with reassurance. We won't let that happen. I have a security detail waiting nearby. We'll figure out the safest way to retrieve the card and meet my contact. But you have to trust me. Silence enveloped them again, punctuated by the hum of the apartment's air conditioning. Finally, Ebony nodded, tears slipping down her cheeks. I have nowhere else to go, she whispered. Relief swelled within him, relief mixed with the cold reality of the danger they all now faced. There was no turning back. They would either bring down a powerful criminal syndicate or risk being silenced in the process. Idowu rose to check the windows, ensuring they were locked. Outside, Lagos life continued unabated, street hawkers, noisy cars, and scorching midday heat. Inside, 3 people were planning the unthinkable, standing up to a hidden but lethal network. Little did they know that events in the coming hours would escalate in ways none of them could have foreseen. Morning light flooded the safe house the next day, illuminating the worn armchairs and the cheap curtained fabric gently swaying in the breeze from the standing fan. Ebony barely slept, perched on the living room couch with her knees drawn to her chest. Yewande dozed intermittently, leaning against the arm of the couch. Idowu was in the second bedroom, going over the plan for the day with hushed phone calls and text messages to his security team. By 7 a.m., he emerged to find Ebony already awake, anxiety etched into her features. We'll move in 2 stages, he said quietly, offering her a cup of tea. First, we'll retrieve the memory card from wherever you've stashed it. Then we'll meet the journalist, Iniko, somewhere public and safe. Ebony nodded, wrapping her hands around the warm cup. She wore a long-sleeved top and simple jeans, garments Idowu had asked his housekeeper to pick up on short notice. The memory card is in a bank safe deposit box in Apapa, she explained, taking a sip of tea. I opened the box using a false name I once used, but I still have the key. The bank manager asked no questions at the time. Apapa, Idowu repeated, pulling up a map on his phone. That area can be chaotic with port traffic. But it might also be a blessing. Hard for anyone to tail us unnoticed if we time it right. We'll go in 2 cars. My security detail will follow at a distance. An hour later, the group of 3 was in motion. Yewande stayed behind in the safe house, at Idowu's insistence, for her own safety. He and Ebony climbed into a nondescript sedan driven by one of Idowu's trusted men, while another car tailed them a couple of vehicles behind. Ebony shrank in her seat, anxiously scanning the side streets. The hustle of Lagos morning traffic, buses packed with workers, Okadas weaving in and out, was both a refuge and a risk. So many people, so many potential threats. After nearly 2 hours of navigating congested roads and near-constant honking, they arrived at the bank, a modest branch located near Apapa Wharf. Outside, trucks lined the streets, waiting to enter the port. Exhaust fumes mingled with the salty tang of the harbor. Idowu and Ebony slipped through the bank's glass doors, blending in with the morning customers. Inside, the cool rush of air conditioning offered brief respite. Ebony led him to the front desk, presenting her key to a clerk who asked only for a form of identification. She produced a false ID, likely acquired during her time on the run, and the clerk, after a cursory glance, nodded. He directed them to a small, windowless room where safe deposit boxes were kept. Minutes later, they emerged with a small, sealed envelope in Ebony's trembling hand. Outside, Idowu's security men were vigilant. One discreetly waved them over, indicating that everything looked clear. With a nod, Idowu guided Ebony back to the sedan. Her hands clutched the envelope so tightly that her knuckles went white. How do we know we're not being followed? She whispered, glancing over her shoulder. We'll take a longer route back, Idowu assured, instructing his driver to circle around side streets. They maneuvered through the port area, eventually entering more residential neighborhoods. So far, no sign of suspicious tail cars or motorbikes. By midday, they were headed to Hstorytine, where Ineko had agreed to meet them in a busy open-air cafe that doubled as a small art gallery. The chatter of customers, clatter of cups, and the swirl of paint fumes from an artist's corner all contributed to a lively anonymity. Perfect for a clandestine meeting. They found Ineko at a corner table, laptop open, sipping ginger tea. She was a poised woman, perhaps in her late 30s, wearing braided hair pinned up in a bun. A proud Yoruba necklace graced her neckline, giving her an air of both tradition and modernity. She stood when Idowu approached, shaking his hand warmly before turning to Ebony with gentle concern. "You must be the young lady Idowu told me about," she said, her voice kind but professional. "I'm Ineko." Ebony nodded shyly. "Thank you for meeting us." They wasted no time. Once seated, Ebony produced the envelope. She opened it, revealing a tiny memory card taped inside. "The evidence is on here," she said, voice trembling. "Videos, pictures. I copied them from my phone before I destroyed it." Ineko carefully extracted the card, slid it into an adapter, then inserted it into her laptop. Seconds later, a series of files appeared on the screen. The color drained from her face as she clicked through them. Grainy images and short videos showed men, some easily identifiable, others partially concealed, carrying out illicit transactions. Then the footage of a chilling scene, a confrontation that ended with a gunshot, the camera shaking, capturing the blood-stained ground. "This is significant," Ineko breathed, eyes wide. "There are recognizable faces here. High-level figures. If this goes public, it will cause an uproar." Ebony looked away, swallowing her fear. "They'll kill me if they find out I've shown anyone." Ineko shut the laptop, her expression resolute. "We'll need to act fast. I can coordinate with an international news agency to break this story. That way, local media can't be pressured into burying it. But you'll need immediate protection. Once this is out, there's no turning back." Idowu nodded, anticipating this. "I'll arrange for Ebony's extraction to a safe location, maybe even out of the country, if necessary. My security detail is on standby. We can move as soon as we finalize the plan." They made quick arrangements. Ineko would digitally encrypt and upload the files to a secure cloud, sending them to a trusted international journalist contact. Meanwhile, Idowu's team would drive Ebony to an undisclosed location in the outskirts of Lagos, where she would temporarily stay under heavy guard. Once the story broke, they'd gauge the threat level and decide if relocation to another country was necessary. Just as they sealed the plan with a tense handshake, screams erupted from the cafe entrance. 2 men in dark hoodies had entered, brandishing pistols. Chaos ensued. Customers scrambled, tables overturned, and in seconds, the men aimed their weapons at Idowu's group. "Get down," one of them shouted. But his eyes were locked on Ebony. "Don't move." Idowu's security men stationed outside sprang into action, but the gunmen had the advantage of surprise. Ineko crouched behind the table, laptop clutched protectively. Ebony froze, eyes wide with terror. These were the men her father's associates had likely sent. The second gunman lunged forward, trying to grab Ebony. In that split second, Idowu reacted, hurling a chair at the intruder. The man stumbled, discharging a shot that ricocheted off the tiled floor, sending sparks and shrieks through the air. Ebony darted to the side, attempting to scramble behind another table. Chaos erupted fully. Shouts, the thunder of footsteps, and more gunfire. One bullet shattered a display of local paintings, sending shards of glass flying. Another grazed an innocent bystander, who collapsed with a wail. The first gunman aimed at Idowu, who dropped to the floor just in time. Another bullet whizzed overhead, lodging into the wall. Outside, Idowu's security detail broke through the crowd, returning fire. One gunman let out a choked cry as a bullet struck his shoulder. He staggered, but still tried to raise his weapon. The second gunman grabbed Ebony's wrist, dragging her toward the exit. She kicked and thrashed, screaming in terror. At the threshold, a large security agent appeared, tackling the assailant in a powerful maneuver. The gun clattered to the ground. Abeni stumbled free, tears streaming down her face. She flung herself into Iduu's arms, trembling uncontrollably. Both gunmen were swiftly disarmed and pinned to the floor by Iduu's men. Police sirens echoed in the distance, alerted by frightened passers-by. Iniko crouched behind a table, unharmed but visibly shaken, cradling her laptop as if it were a precious child. Around them, the cafe was a scene of shattered glass, overturned chairs, and petrified customers. Breathing heavily, Iduu guided Abeni to a safer corner. "It's over," he murmured, though he knew it was just the beginning of a larger battle. Police stormed in, guns drawn, forcing everyone to remain in place as they assessed the situation. Iniko took the opportunity to slip the memory card from her laptop and hide it in her bra, just in case. A man in uniform approached Iduu, demanding an explanation. Carefully, Iduu provided a statement, leaving out critical details about the evidence to avoid leaks. Meanwhile, paramedics arrived to tend to the wounded bystander and the injured gunman. Amid the pandemonium, Abeni clung to Iduu's arm. Her eyes glistened with tears of relief and lingering terror. "Thank you," she whispered, voice ragged. "If you hadn't, I'm just glad you're safe," he said softly, though his heart hammered in his chest. He had nearly lost her to the criminals she'd been running from. What followed was hours of questioning, but Iduu's wealth and influence expedited their release. The attackers were carted off by police, though Iduu and Iniko knew well that corruption within the force was a real threat. By early evening, they managed to secure Abeni's swift transport to the outskirts, where a private safehouse awaited. 2 days later, Iniko's bombshell story dropped on several international news platforms, featuring blurred images and partial videos from Abeni's memory card. The reaction was immediate and explosive. Prominent figures implicated in the footage swiftly denied involvement, but as more evidence poured out, investigators were compelled to act. Several arrests followed, and rumors spread of more criminals fleeing the country. In the aftermath, Iduu made the difficult decision to help Abeni relocate. Through a connection, she was granted a temporary visa to Ghana, where she could lay low until the dust settled. Standing at Murtala Muhammad International Airport's departure lounge, Abeni held a small backpack, the same one she had clutched like a life vest. She turned to Iduu, eyes full of gratitude and sorrow. "You've done so much for me," she said, voice trembling. I wish things could have been different." He pulled her into a brief, warm hug. "You can always reach me," he murmured, slipping a note with his contact details into her hand. "Stay safe. Live your life." Tears glistened on her cheeks. "I'm sorry about everything, your clothes, the watch. I hope someday I can repay you." Iduu shook his head gently. "You already have. By teaching me that even the smallest act of kindness can have the biggest consequences." "Go," he urged, forcing a reassuring smile. Abeni nodded, eyes reflecting the finality of their goodbye. Then she turned and walked toward the security checkpoint, disappearing into the tide of travelers. Wu exhaled a shaky breath, a swirl of emotions churning in his chest: relief, sorrow, triumph, regret. The events of the past week felt surreal, like an intense fever dream. He left the airport, stepping into the warm Nigerian sun, which felt different now, as if shining on a changed man. Days later, back in his penthouse, Iduu was preparing for another day of work when he noticed something on his dresser, a small package wrapped in plain brown paper. No return address. Carefully, he unwrapped it, revealing his missing watch, polished to a gleaming shine. Tucked beside it was a handwritten note on torn paper. "I promised I'd repay you. This is all I have to give now. Thank you for saving my life." Iduu's heart clenched. The watch's ticking sounded louder than usual in the quiet of the penthouse. He stared at it for a long moment, thinking of Abeni somewhere in Ghana, hopefully forging a new path. He set the watch gently on his wrist, its weight a reminder of trust, betrayal, second chances, and the unpredictable course of fate. But just as he thought the chapter had closed, his phone lit up with a message from an unknown number. A single sentence that made his blood run cold. "We know what you did. This isn't over." Shock pulsed through him, a stark reminder that while Abeni might be safe for now, her enemies weren't done. And neither, it seemed, was he. The end wasn't a neat bow, it was the start of another harrowing journey, one that underscored how fleeting safety could be when a single act of kindness tangles with powerful, malevolent forces. The next chapter of Idu Babalola's life would be anything but peaceful, and that final note left him knowing the storm was far from over. The end. If you enjoyed this story, we invite you to give it a like and subscribe to our channel. Your support motivates us to keep bringing heartwarming stories almost every day. We are very grateful for your support. See you soon.